Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is David Noble. I will tell you all about David in just a moment. Grace Under Pressure is that show that deals with what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment we exert toward others. And when you do it as a leader, as you will definitely discover that David is, you do it with a common cause of bringing people together. David Noble, it is a pleasure to have you on the show today. Welcome.
Thank you so much, John. I'm really delighted to be here.
David is the co-author of a brand new book with Carol Kauffman called Real-Time Leadership. And it's extraordinary. We'll talk about the book going forward. David brings an interesting perspective to, he is an executive coach, but before that, he was a strategist for a consulting firm, and then also an executive. So he brings an operational focus. So strategy, operations, and executive coaching. And if you're a senior leader, David is the person you want to talk to. So let me tell you about it. David, you work on leadership and strategy. Your personal purpose, I like this, is to help leaders gain clarity and personal growth on issues that matter to them. You're named by Thinkers 50, which is the most prestigious in our field, as one of the world's top coaches, and where you are a managing partner at two global strategy consultancies. And as I mentioned, you are a co-author with our friend Carol Kauffman of Real-Time Leadership. Welcome to Grace Under Pressure, David.
Thank you, John.
Great. Now, in the intro to the book, you say something. We live in a fast-paced culture, and so things are breaking around very quickly, and leaders want to react. So you say, slow down. And so I have to say, question, are you crazy?
Oh, well, thanks for that. Good opening comment.
Okay, interview's over. See you, Dave.
Right. No, look, fair enough. I think that the premise that Carol and I have is that real-time leadership is about making the most of every moment, because there's so much coming at us and the level of uncertainty just continues to escalate. So we find that most people make the most of every moment through their deep pattern recognition that they've based on years of experience. So, you see A happen, you see B happen, you instinctively know that C is the right thing to do. But, that doesn't work for non-day-to-day operating environments, which we've been in over and over again. So what you need to do is to be able to know when and how to transcend those reflexes. So part of it is just creating that space so that you don't reflex, you respond. So how do you create that space? So it's like slowing time down. We know we can't slow time down, but for us, it's all about mindfulness, like mindfulness and concentration of an athlete, where you're in that zone and everything appears to kind of slow down. We help you step into that kind of zone.
I love that analogy because it's one of ones I've come up with. Every collegiate athlete, whether basketball or football, goes into the pros, and the first thing they say, I didn't realize how fast it was. But over time, maybe a season, things, quote, slow down. But as you say, they don't slow down. They have adapted. Is that what's happening?
Yeah, great analogy and insight. Absolutely.
Great. Now you have an entire model on this. It's called MOVE. And I want to walk through each one of the steps because they're important. MOVE, the first one is M. Tell us what M means and how do we implement it? So
that goes to the point of being mindfully alert. So it's really understanding what's happening outside of you in your operating environment, but also understanding what's happening inside you in terms of your emotional state, and looking at all of those things in an accepting, non-judgmental way, and using that to act in the interest of your goals. So when we think about mindfully alert, it's to what? Well, for us, there's 3 dimensions of leadership. It's basically the goals that you've got. So the first everybody knows about, it's the external goal. What do you want or need to get done? I need to get that project finished. I need to complete that M&A deal. I need to hit those financial targets. But another dimension is the inner dimension of who do you want to be as a human while you're leading? So do you want to be that person who's kind, generous, has perspective, is patient, whatever? And the third dimension is, if you know what you want to do and you know who you want to be while you're doing it, then how can you best relate to get things done through others and achieve goals together. And that's the interpersonal dimension. So it's being alert to all three dimensions.
Okay. So M is being mindfully alert. I want to explore that because you talk about the inner qualities. What kind of a person do I want to be? When you're working with executives and you talk about kindness and compassion, does anyone really say, no, I want to be unkind and uncompassionate?
No, they don't do that, but they might not value those things.
Yeah, and so that's my field, or I write about grace and things like that, and no one says, "Well, I'd like to be ungraceful," but I don't. So, what if someone says, "Yeah, I hear you, David, but it's really not me"? What would you say to that response? So,
well, I think there's many different types of internal qualities that you can cultivate or project that aren't those kind of purely soft things, right? There's this notion of being fair, the notion of being a listener, notion of having perspective on things. Those are things that people won't roll their eyes at. Those who do roll their eyes at things like kindness and generosity and compassion, all I can tell you is that Carol and I work with a retired 4-star general who saw a lot of combat experience in combat roles, and Chuck Jacoby. And his perspective is, having worked with the toughest people on the planet, that kindness is the sort of crucial aspect of leadership, that it really matters. So you can roll your eyes all you want, but I think that there is a case to be made for kindness.
No, and I'm glad you mentioned that. I've done some work. I've on this show interviewed military folks and coached them as well. And you're absolutely right. One of the words that often comes up, special forces people, is the word love. And if they can love one another, then executives can learn it too.
Yeah, you got it.
And it's not just love one another, but actually articulate it and demonstrate it. And that shows that, and I'm glad you linked this thing to listening, to behaviors. And then people go, oh, the penny drops. Am I correct?
Yes. Yeah, it's all around behaviors. And
Great.
You have to do things that speak to you, because maybe a notion of love and kindness doesn't speak to you immediately. That's okay. There's other things to cultivate too, but at some point in time, it'll be the right moment to think about it and reflect on it and want to work on it.
That's great. Now we come to O and move. What is that all about, David?
So for us, it's about creating options, the options generator. So if you think about, I'm really clear on my goals. This is what I need to do. This is who I want to be. This is how I need to relate. Then how are you going to do that? So today, because there's so many obstacles and curveballs thrown at us as leaders, every good leader has got a pathway to a win, but that's not good enough. You need to have a backup. You need to have a backup to your backup. Everyone knows the notion of willpower, but there's also another notion called way power, which is multiple pathways forward. And the more pathways you have forward, the more likely you are to be successful. So we really want to help you step in and create many different options to win. And we show you how to do that in the book. It's actually not just a theoretical thing. It's very practical about how you step into those options.
Well, you use the word in the book, you use the word lean in 4 different ways. So
yeah, that's one way of creating options. Yeah.
So, so you say lean in and lean back. Those are kind of obvious, but there's one I liked, and it's something I've hit. You say don't lean. So what does it mean when we have options? What does it mean don't lean? Does it mean stand up straight, as my wife always reminds me?
It can mean a few things. So look, we all know that we've got some primitive reflexes: fight, flight, freeze, and now increasingly there's research around the notion of befriend, which is when you see a little kid in the street and the bus is coming down the street to run them over, you don't think, you just reflex and save the child. So we've translated those 4 reflexes into leadership stances. So different options that you can take when you're interacting with people. So lean in, everybody knows about. It's having a point of view, being decisive, giving guidance. Lean back is more like, hey, I need some more data here. I need some more analysis. I got to consult some more people. Lean with is, it's about the connection. It's the person first. So it's like, hey, we're in this together. I believe in you. I got your back. You can do this. And then don't lean That's the hardest possible action for almost any leader, right? We have this impulse to do something. So not leaning does a couple of things. So first of all, if you just take a moment and don't feel that you need to do anything, hey, maybe the situation is going to take care of itself. Maybe your team will actually take care of this.
Yeah.
Maybe circumstances will change. You'll be okay. But another thing is maybe you should just take that to still yourself, to calm yourself for a moment so that you can not panic based on the situation you're in. And maybe something's going to come to you in your intuition, the things that you don't know that you know. And there might be something creative that you hadn't thought about that will come to the situation. All of this is just, you got to read the situation and be able to be agile across all those different stances.
Okay. I sensed that when you had got to don't lean, you would say, this is the hardest because leadership is about action and it's about doing things. And so is there ever a discussion that you have with, say, you're coaching someone and there's impetus to intervene, but there's another part. Do you ever say, let your people solve this for their own development? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that also goes to our notion of how do you affect change at scale? Well, a leader has to basically do what only a leader can do. So that means not micromanaging, not second guessing, not just doing the stuff you like, and not delegating everything. So it's really about do what only you can do. And that involves, in many cases, letting your team solve things. Doesn't mean you're completely uninvolved, but it does mean that you don't have to make the decision and take the action in all cases.
Great. So we've been mindful with M. We're generating options with O. Now we come to V. What does V stand for, David?
V means just validate your vantage point. So before you do anything crazy, know that you might be right, but not necessarily. So for us, this is about, are you seeing reality for what it is, or what you hope or fear it would be? So look, all of us, when we're looking at things that we need to get done, we can tend to either exaggerate or discount threats and opportunities. And sometimes we might completely miss the point, right? So this is about seeing reality. And it's also about being able to step into the vantage point of others and taking their perspective and understanding that. So there's a huge element around diversity and inclusion here as well, just from that perspective taking to help you see reality.
Let me explore that a little bit, because we've all heard before you understand a person, you need to walk in their shoes. And so you're talking about adopting the vantage point. Do people go ever push back and say, well, I'm running, maybe subconsciously, I'm running this company, and why do I need somebody else's perspective? Do you get that at all, David? And if so, what do you do about it? So,
you get that less so in terms of different perspectives on strategy and tactics. You get it more around, do I really need to care about how someone is feeling about something, more the interpersonal side. So for that, it's a matter of helping them kind of walk across the bridge to meet the other person where they are, and then taking steps back to where you are. So there's just a different kind of approach to that. So yeah, you get that kind of pushback, but mostly around interpersonal things.
Great. So we've done the M, the O, and the V, and we finally come to E. Tell us what E is.
So that's where everything comes together and you really affect and lead change as a leader at scale. So when you think about M, it's what you want to do. O is how you want to do it. V is what's the reality of all this. E is how do you take this up and scale it? And for us, it's all about sending leadership signals. So the first leadership signal, which is also co-created with your team, is what we call the leader's intent. So based on what we know, where are we going? Why are we going there? What are the signposts along the way to know that we're winning? And then that's the M. And then the O equivalent here is, what are the kind of permissible pathways? I, as a leader, am not going to tell you how to do stuff because there's multiple ways to a win in most cases, but I might give you broad guidelines around options you can pursue. So for example, it might be, we're heading in this direction for growth, but you know what? We can't buy anything right now. So it has to be organic growth. So that's an example of that. And then the last part is, what are the things that we need to do, the reality that we need to deal with, the reality of our time constraints, the reality of our financial constraints, and the reality that we need to behave according to our values and culture. So that's all the first signal. And then basically you check after you send that signal to others, and it's like, did they receive that signal or did they hear something else? And then what do they say about that? It's like you may have missed something, you might be wrong about this. Oh, by the way, the world is changing. We need to update those signals. So you keep updating your leader's intent as you learn new things and things change. So that's the way that we see things driving at scale.
I'm glad you talked about the content continuous updating, because so often employees become a little confused. They have their performance objectives for the year issued in late year or January, whatever, and then by mid-June things have shifted, and executives who don't communicate as well might say, David, how is X coming? You'll go, what X? So I think that you say closes that loop. Am I right? It brings people together. Yeah.
It has to be a tight loop. In the military, they call it briefbacks. So commander gives an intent, and then basically they learn stuff. The field comes back and says that worked, that didn't work, this has changed. And then based on the brief back, you revise your intent.
Great. Well, while we're on the military, and because I know there's something, because you talk a lot about adversity, and one that I learned a lot about adversity is, of course, Warren Bennis, and who learned his first lesson in adversity by being a replacement second lieutenant during the Battle of the Bulge. He was 19 years old, and all hell was breaking through. Loose, literally. And then he wrote a book about, or not, maybe it was a book, but I know it's a Harvard article, Harvard Business Review article about being in the crucible. And he said he had never met a leader, a successful leader, who had not been tested by adversity. What's your take on that, David? So,
I think that's absolutely right, and I actually have a military dimension to the answer. So look, I think that most leaders that I work with equate dealing with adversity as being resilient. So they try and cultivate their resilience. And in the last 3 years, I find in particular the most senior people that I work with, the CEOs, they're really focused on understanding their meaning and purpose, their contribution on the planet, because in the toughest times, that gives them a reason for why they're getting up in the morning. And it also allows them to do things that they wouldn't otherwise do. Like there's some really painful stuff you have to do as a very senior leader. But if you understand it's in the service of your purpose, you're okay with that. Now, the problem with that is that adversity that's playing defense, right? So it's like you take a hit, you get back up, you're still in the game. But there's another dimension to adversity, which is how to play offense. And this is what I find extraordinary leaders do. And that is, it's a military concept. It's called shielded blows, but you're under threat and you're still playing offense. So it's like, how can you, even while under attack, advance your position so that you're in a strategically better place, so when conditions change, you can make the most of that. So that translates in business to, hey, I'm just under threat because my competitors released a disruptive new technology or product. And it's like, what do I do? Well, I'm going to play defense by trying to protect my market share, but I might play offense by buying a piece of a startup company. I might come up with a new product launch that is going to be an attack component to my own product offering, things like that. So you're basically improving your strategic position. So I find that in adversity, you got to play both offense and defense.
That is remarkable. I love the idea. I was going to ask you about resilience, but I had never seen it framed in a proactive way, because you talked about it, reactive, as you say, but going back. Is that in a way, is that a little bit of jujitsu? Should we? I mean, using the enemy's strength against them, or is that part of that?
You could look at it that way. I mean, I come from the world of financial services where risk management features quite significantly, maybe not as much as it should have in things like Silicon Valley Bank. But when I look at every return that I've got from a project that I'm working on or investing in, or a decision I take, has a risk. But it's also true that every risk that I take has an opportunity inside it. So you have to look at the duality of those things. If you're only looking at one side, it's by definition limiting you and possibly hurting you. So I think that one side of only playing defense in adversity is just downside and risk. the upside is offense, and that's the opportunity.
Great. You mentioned something earlier about the CEOs that you worked with. They're focused on personal meaning, purpose, and the legacy of sort. Have you found that the discussions on purpose or meaning have deepened since COVID, or did anything change? So,
I think that the exhaustion, despite the resilience of many leaders, has led many to question, like, what do I really want to do? So it's not just a matter of surviving in the job. It's like looking out and going, like, what's life all about, and how can I make the most of it? So I think there's a whole cohort of people. It's not just CEOs. It's many different types of leaders. So a lot of people are doing that. So it's a huge spike in my business. It's also a massive spike for, I think probably 25% of my coaching business are with people that are 49, 50, or 51 years old. So there's something about that kind of magic moment that causes reflection, where you've got lots of runway left, but you want to make the most of your time.
That's true. Now, we touched on this topic before, and I just want to press a little bit harder, because this is in the MOVE model. It's mindfulness and generating options and validation and engagement. And what role does kindness play in this? You had touched on the behavioral aspect, but is there another dimension that you engage on, David?
So I think, you can be a very good leader without necessarily being kind, as long as you've got some really significant other character strengths, right? It's like I've worked with leaders, I've had bosses that I don't think are particularly kind, but they've been extremely fair. They've been patient, they've been listeners, they've had perspectives. So, I could ask for more, but I didn't need to. But I think where kindness for me, kindness is kind of a way to supercharge your leadership. And the reason that I say that is that, what we've been talking about, those character strengths, that's the second dimension of leadership, the inner dimension, right? So to be kind means that you are generous and considerate. So that's two great factors in that inner dimension of who you want to be. But kindness also bridges into the interpersonal. So if you're going to be considerate, that means you need to care about other people's feelings. You need to be able to read them, and you need to be able to relate to them and be willing to do that in a way that they want and need to be related to. So for me, it's that kindness sort of bridges the inner and the interpersonal. And it's amazing. It's one of those few factors that goes across.
That's exactly. And I think, as you were talking about your own experience and good bosses, because you spoke favorably of them and not necessarily manifested kindness, but I'm guessing they were respectful of you and others. They had respect for others on the team. Am I correct with that?
Yeah. They respected me because they listened to me. They valued my opinion. And
Great. Now, you and your co-author, Carol Kauffman, have an interesting approach to coaching called 2-on-1. How does that work? So
I'll give you an example of how it came to be. So Carol was coaching the new first-time CEO of a Fortune 200 company, and he was having a lot of problems because he was not regulating himself very well with his team, and he would throw his iPad around and storm out of meetings, and so
that could be expensive.
Yeah, that could be expensive in many ways. So she was working with him one day, and I happened to be working with his team, and we all decided. So Carol and I met with the CEO together, and I just sat in on it, and so she was going down the path of, is this who you are? Is this who you want to be? More the second dimension and the third dimension. And I started to go down the path of the first dimension, which is, well, what is it that you're trying to get done? So he said, well, I'm trying to shift this organization from a decentralized model to an enterprise-led model. It's like, okay, well, that's been done before. So I said, so how did you do that? Have you told people your leader's intent about this is where we're going, this is why we're going there, here are the signposts, here's the way you do it, have you changed their incentive models, all that? And he's like, I did the first part of that. I was like, okay, well, that's probably a reason why you're not getting alignment and the result that you want. So light bulb went off there. So then Carol was able to adjust her behavioral coaching to make the most of what he learned around this leader's intent. So it was like Reese's peanut butter cup, right? Just the chocolate and peanut butter collided, and it was a good product.
That is such a good story. And what's interesting about it is because you just sketched it as the CEO was having behavioral issues, which is Carol's bailiwick. And then you come in and you're not a behavioralist. You're the strategy ops guy, but you turn the equation. And isn't that interesting how to explore that? What is it you really want? So great story. Sadly, we are racing toward the end of our show. And as you know, I like to ask every guest a story about grace. And I know you have one, David. So have at it, please.
Okay, I will try to be as brief as possible. So I grew up in a relatively poor household. I was an only child. My dad would turn over his entire paycheck to my mom every 2 weeks, and he would keep enough money to buy himself a coffee once a day and a haircut once a month. And somehow the family scraped together enough money to buy a new car, which was his pride and joy. So I was 18 and he let me drive it. So I was out with one of my friends kind of showing off, and we drove back to the house, and I put the car through the carport into the wall. And my dad was a military veteran, and he had undiagnosed PTSD, but he had massive issues around emotion regulation and potentially violence as well. And I basically said to my friend, run, because he's going to kill us. Yeah. And I really did think that he was going to kill me. And so I opened the door, and he was standing at the top of the staircase. It was late at night. He was in his pajamas, and he said, "Is that you, David?" And I said, "Yeah, it's me." And I was terrified. And he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, yeah, I'm okay. And he said, "Why don't you just come to bed? We'll talk about it in the morning. It's just a thing." And that was like so powerful to me. And I remember that it's just so vibrant in my mind that I just don't care about things now. So if something material happens, or someone breaks something, or someone, breaks something invaluable, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. So his love for me was far greater than his love for his new shiny car. So,
and that's, what a sweet story. And the way you framed it, because your father was emotionally fragile from PTSD, whatever, and the way he was able to put it into perspective at that moment, that's a powerful, and as you said, that was love. And isn't that what we all try to do? But I know on my end, I don't always do it.
We don't always do it, but that was grace, and that was his way of overcoming his reflex, because he created a space by knowing how much he cared about me. So
that is grace in action, and it happens in big ways and small ways, and it's a life altering, and it resonates with you. So we have been talking about Real-Time Leadership by Carol Kauffman and David Noble. And there's an interesting part of this. First of all, it's a rich read for executives, but also for executive coaches. And what I like about it, there's a summary note after every chapter, but there's also models and things to consider and assessments. So this is a rich book of, I'll say, wisdom. So kudos to you, David. It's a good and powerful read. And not only that, keep it on your bookshelf. I know I will, because I'm going to need this. So thank you and Carol. So with that, we are going to go out. So, first of all, how can we find you? So,
two ways. So one is just my email is david.noble @ViewAdvisors, VIEW-ADVISORS.com. And then you can also go to the landing page for the book, which is rtlinstitute.com. So RTL is short for Real-Time Leadership, rtlinstitute.com.
Great. Well, we will put that in the notes. David, thank you. And with that, we will go out.
Thank you, John.